Between the year 1900 and 1964, over 800 people were hanged in the UK. But some of these long-standing convictions could have been a miscarriage of justice.
They got no evidence. They're just trying to haul anybody in for it.
Barristers Sasha Wass and Jeremy Dean have been investigating these life-changing cases as they teamed up with a living relative, desperate to clear their family name.
Deep in my heart, I truly believe that he wasn't guilty.
Together, they investigated the convictions.
There's a stench about this. Probably wouldn't even be admissible in the modern time.
He has the opportunity to kill her, he has the weapons to kill her, and we know that they've had contact beforehand.
And reassessed the evidence using modern forensic techniques.
The findings on it are really quite instructive. There was no blood inside the hammer.
Before they submitted their findings to a Crown Court judge, who determined whether the conviction was safe or could have been a miscarriage of justice.
I'm here today to consider, with the help of learned counsel, the safety of the conviction.
Now, as we reunite the barristers and the family members for the first time, we'll be finding out exactly what happened next.
The lack of medical evidence at the time means that we can put your report forward as new evidence.
Was justice finally served? And are the unexplained cases finally closed? Today, Jeremy and Sasha are revisiting the double murder of two policemen in the West Yorkshire countryside in 1951. One man was hanged for it. His name, Alfred Moore.
Well, Jeremy, this case involved a police operation which targeted the defendant, and it seemed that all the pieces of evidence fitted together rather well.
Well, Sasha, I'm not sure about that. I mean, this is a case in which the murder weapon was never found, and perhaps most worryingly of all, the key witness was a witness who made an identification from his deathbed. Now, that doesn't inspire me with much confidence that the police got the right man.
Well, of course, that was a subject of great debate between the two of us when we were looking at the case originally.
This is a case which throws up a lot of debate, and there are some really fascinating issues arising from it.
We're going to meet the family member later, but before we do, let's remind ourselves of the facts of this historic case.
And died the next day in hospital. 3 hours after the shooting, the owner of the farm, 36-year-old Alfred Moore, was arrested at his farmhouse and charged with murder. At the subsequent trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. On the 6th of February 1952, Alfred Moore was hanged at Leeds Armley Prison. He protested his innocence to the last.
I'm not guilty of the crime of which I have been convicted, and I beg you to show mercy and grant me a reprieve. I am convinced that one day my innocence will be established.
65 years on, Alfred's daughter Bronwyn is still desperate to clear her father's name.
It's heartbreaking. When you read it, you know that this is the last thing that he ever did in his life, and he's pleading for his innocence. And the last sentence in particular, it's very moving when he says he is convinced that one day my innocence will be established. And I hope, sincerely, that that can happen.
In 1939, at the outbreak of war, Alfred married Alice Cox. And together, they had 4 daughters. Bronwyn was the youngest, just 2 when her father was hanged.
It had been hidden from me. I like to think I was protected a little because I was so young when the incident happened. By the time I got old enough to be able to understand what had happened, nobody spoke about it. I'd like to learn more about the incident from different aspects. I have the view of my own research, but I would like to hear what other people have to say, professionals who have looked into the case. I hope to discover that there's something somewhere in this evidence that can prove that my father was innocent.
Helping Bronwyn to investigate the case are two of the country's leading legal minds. Jeremy Dean QC is a top defence barrister with over 30 years' experience specialising in serious crime.
Analysing the case for the prosecution is Sasha Wass QC, who has successfully convicted some of the country's most notorious offenders.
Together, they will scrutinise the facts, focusing on the areas that could produce the new evidence they'll need to take the case forward.
Bronwyn.
Hi.
Hello, I'm Sasha.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Jeremy. Nice to
Jeremy.
meet you too.
First, they want to get Bronwyn's view on the case.
It would help us if you were to give us a brief overview of why it is you're so confident that your father was victim of a miscarriage of justice.
Lack of evidence, the fact that the gun was never found. His alibi was so simple, but often simple things, you know, are the truth.
In some cases which are historic, such as this, modern techniques can actually prove that a particular defendant did the act. Now, are you prepared that that might be the result in this case?
Yes, I am.
Yes, you've braced yourself.
Yes, but deep in my heart, I truly believe that he wasn't guilty.
I can't make any promises. What I can say is that I'll be exploring every angle in order to see whether there are grounds for reopening your father's case.
If anything comes to my attention which causes me concern about the case, I won't hesitate to support your perspective.
The first task for the barristers is to identify the key facts of the murder.
Can I tell you what my first impressions are? The police staked out Alfred's farm because he was suspected of being a well-known local burglar. And on the night in question, a cordon was set around the farm. And in fact, the shooting took place on Alfred's own property. So, number one, Alfred was on his own property when the guns were discharged. Secondly, Alfred was actually identified by the police. Mr. Jagger saw the shooting take place. He was one of the victims, and he identified the culprit.
One of the key points in the prosecution cases you've identified is the so-called identification parade. But PC Jagger identifies the suspect at a hospital when he's about to die. For me, it was a farce. And then the murder weapon. The murder weapon was never found. So far as the police cordon is concerned, there are reasons to be concerned about the evidence that police officers gave. So this is a very worrying case. And I'm much closer to Bronwyn's standpoint than you are.
With the barristers already at odds, Bronwyn is returning to West Yorkshire and the family farm where the double murder took place.
Coming back all these years later to see the farm where I should have been brought up, it brings home to me the different path my life took. I would have grown up on a beautiful farm like that in the fresh air. It does affect me standing here thinking what might have been.
Alfred Moore returned from service in the Merchant Navy to a Britain ravished by war. Austerity and rationing prevented many families from getting back on their feet. For some, like Alfred, the desire for a better family life led to the trading of goods on the black market and other illegal activities to supplement income.
When my father came back from the Merchant Navy and they needed money, it was coming up to Christmas, there was no food in the house, and he did his first burglary.
By July 1951, despite Moore's decision to quit his life of crime, a plan to catch him was already underway. On the night of the 14th of July, 10 police officers on a stakeout had formed a cordon around his farm.
Let me talk you through what the prosecution at trial called the cordon evidence. In the earlier part of the evening, Alfred was at home with his wife and family. His brother Charles came to visit. The evidence of Alfred, and indeed his brother Charles, was that Alfred walked Charles part of the way home.
According to Alfred, he left his brother at 11:25, walking back via the cemetery. up a footpath leading to the farm, arriving home between 11:45 and midnight.
The police evidence is that the officers all convened at the ash tip here by 11:37, and thereafter they separated to their posts. The timing of the police was something very much relied on by the prosecution.
The prosecution alleged that Alfred couldn't have arrived home after 11:45 because the police cordon was in place and he would have been stopped.
The prosecution case was that Alfred Moore didn't return home until just before 2 o'clock. When he walked up this footpath to his home, the police evidence is that he would have passed this spot just before 2 o'clock in the morning. And that happens to be where those two officers were shot.
Yes.
Bronwyn is meeting Steve Lawson, a former local detective with an in-depth knowledge of the case. They're on the footpath at the bottom of the cordon near the spot where the policemen were shot.
This was where Constable Jagger was allegedly posted on the night in question. When your dad came home, he said he came up this footpath from the cemetery, crossed over the stile, went up the footpath, over the other two stiles and back to the farm. They say no. Your dad came home at a later time and your dad was the shooter and the thing happened about 2 o'clock in the morning, right? The problem with that is, whoever it was who was up that footpath at 2 o'clock in the morning had got past this position here.
Yes.
Where Constable Jagger was supposed to have been positioned, and he'd been there since 11:45.
So where do you think he was positioned then?
It came out at the trial that it rained that night. Had they all taken shelter, the policemen, where they should have been? And if they weren't, it makes a whole mockery of the whole situation.
Jeremy also has doubts whether the cordon was even in place at the time the police claim.
I think this is a very, very shaky area. I haven't seen any documentation that their timings are accurate. Alfred Moore said that he parted company with his brother at between 11:20 and 11:25. If, in fact, he parted company with his brother a few minutes earlier, he could have been back at home before the police cordon was in place. So the cordon point collapses. We're playing here with 3, 4, 5 minutes.
And this is really very primitive observation.
Absolutely. I'm afraid, I think we have to factor in that these police officers were part of a team and they had lost 2 of their colleagues in a vicious murder. And there was an interest in them giving evidence in a manner which made it physically impossible for Alfred Moore to get home and breach the cordon. So overall, I just think this body of evidence is suspect.
If Alfred Moore was the culprit, as the police claim, then what happened to the gun? A 2-week search of the farmhouse and the land had failed to unearth any potential murder weapon.
The question of whether Alfred Moore can be linked to the murder weapon is crucial. And the only connection the prosecution were able to raise was the evidence of Joe Baxter.
Joe Baxter was a local removal man who had served in the Navy and claimed to be knowledgeable about guns. Jeremy is hoping firearms expert Innes Knight can shoot holes in the evidence of Joe Baxter connecting Moore to a possible murder weapon.
What he alleged is that in Alfred Moore's toolbox, some considerable time before the murder of the 2 police officers, he saw a Luger automatic revolver.
Yes, that statement is wrong on so many counts. Luger only made a pistol.
Yeah.
The difference between a pistol and a revolver is quite large. It's a completely different operating system.
And they look completely different.
They look completely different.
Joe Baxter claimed that he knew the difference between the two, but on the face of it, that's just rubbish, isn't it?
No one would say a Luger automatic revolver. It has never existed. Anyone with even the slightest bit of knowledge would probably not.
So anyone who claims to have had knowledge of the difference between the two is talking nonsense.
It's nonsense.
The lack of any direct evidence against Alfred Moore didn't prevent the press in 1952 from painting him as an irrefutable villain. Bronwyn has come to Huddersfield Library to dig out local reports about the case.
It's the story of Alfred Moore, murderer and self-confessed burglar. He was been reported as being the guilty man right from the beginning. There was only one man they concentrated on. It's Inspector Fraser's personal ambition to have more caught for the disconcerting series of burglars which had clearly pointed to him but could not be proved. And I do feel that they took the opportunity to make the crime fit.
Alfred Moore's alibi on the night of the murder was simple, and one he consistently maintained to the end.
How could it be me? I was in bed with my wife. It's the simple truth. It's such a simple alibi, and the only people that could prove it are his wife and children.
There was no reason for the jury to doubt Moore's alibi, except for the testimony of Alfred's 10-year-old daughter, Patricia, who slept in the same bedroom.
In this particular paper, it says about my sister being brought in as a witness. Patricia went into the witness box and her head barely showing above the top of it. Moore called to her, "Hello, Pat." In a hesitant voice and amid occasional tears, Patricia said that her father and her Uncle Charles left the house on July the 14th after supper. She heard her father come through the French window, and he was cross because she wasn't asleep. Using Pat as a witness, I do think was distasteful. A 10-year-old girl, it was something that she never got over.
Patricia's statement suggested Moore arrived home much later than he claimed in his own account.
His own daughter contradicted his alibi.
You're placing emphasis on the testimony of a 10-year-old girl.
Well, we both looked very carefully at Patricia's evidence.
Well, there's not much to look at. Her statement's about 3 lines long.
She uses as a pinpoint the sounding of a whistle.
Yeah.
She doesn't know what that whistle is, but piecing the evidence together, it would appear that it must have been a police whistle once the shooting had been discovered.
Why?
Let me finish about her evidence. She doesn't say it was 12:30 or 2:30 or whatever. She says her father arrived home after the sounding of a police whistle. That is consistent with the shooting.
You're saying the little girl, who might well have been under malign police influence, was relied on by the prosecution to pinpoint Alfred Moore's arrival home at being approximately 2:30 because she said in a statement which was about 5 lines long, the authenticity of which we know nothing, he arrived home after the police whistle. I think the evidence is arguably very suspect.
What can the latest investigative techniques tell us about the murderer? Bronwyn has come to Huddersfield University to meet criminal psychologist Donna Young.
You must be Donna.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you.
She's analysed both case files and personal documents to build a profile of Alfred Moore. Is it a match for the killer?
What we do is we model the details of different types of offences to see what they will tell us about the individual who might have carried out those crimes. Certainly my reading of all the documents is that your father didn't have a serious professional criminal mind and he didn't have an aggressive criminal mind. I'm struggling very much to match what we know about the shooting from what I can glean about your father.
But it's the personal letters written by Alfred Moore from his prison cell that are most revealing.
I see here a number of different clues as to somebody who may not be guilty. Can you remember the pieces about the pigs?
Mix 4 parts of cereal to 1 part of fish meal. Yes.
It's quite charming in a way. And to think that this is written by somebody sitting in a prison cell.
Yes.
It's somebody still in life. When somebody knows that they are going to die, we see a withdrawal from life and all the details of their previous life. Absolute opposite is what we're seeing here. He assumes that somehow his innocence is going to win through.
It's the last line where he expects that one day someone will prove his innocence.
Well, maybe that's what you're doing.
Someone will know.
At Leeds Armley Prison on the 6th of February 1952, Alfred Moore was hanged until dead. His body was buried in an unmarked grave within the prison walls.
I'm so surprised to arrive at Armley Jail and see such an austere building. The last thing my father saw before his death. I'm just lost for words, really. I believe I came to visit my father the day before he died. I was only 2 years old, and thankfully I remember nothing about it.
Bronwyn wants to see where her father is laid to rest, and has been permitted by the prison to read the record of his execution.
This is the first time that I've seen such a record. It gives details of his age and his height. His build was stout and strong. Then it gives the particulars of the execution, the length and drop, and the cause of death. His neck was broken. It's the basic facts of my father's death, and, you know, just to see them in black and white, it's hard. It's very hard.
In 1989, Alfred Moore's remains were exhumed, along with other executed prisoners, and reburied at a cemetery just a short walk from the prison.
It may be odd to say, but I'm quite relieved to find that my father is in such a peaceful place. Hi, Dad. I hope this is a surprise. 66 years later. I'm here with respect. I'm so pleased that you're no longer inside Army jail. I hope you can now rest in peace. I know you're not guilty of murder, and hopefully this will lead one day to clearing your name. Bye, Dad. I will see you again. I promise.
With the investigation drawing to a close, Jeremy is still searching for new evidence that casts doubt on Alfred Moore as the killer. He knows PC Jagger's identification of Moore was a damning piece of evidence that formed the core of the prosecution's case. But it was made in an unorthodox fashion, at his hospital bedside just hours before he died.
If we can obtain expert evidence to the effect that PC Jagger was not in a fit state to engage in that identification procedure, it's possible to use that material as the basis for reopening Alfred Moore's convictions.
Philip Hopkins is a professor of anaesthesia at the University of Leeds. He studied PC Jagger's medical records in detail.
So he was brought into hospital and underwent surgery for the removal of the bullet. He was given morphine, and then at 4:50, there was a identification procedure.
Correct, yes,
All right.
I agree.
The surgeon described him as being alert by midday.
Alert, at its most basic, means he opens his eyes spontaneously. What it doesn't infer at all is anything about PC Jagger's mental function, whether his memory was intact, whether he was aware of where he was, who he was, what year it was. It would be standard to write alert and orientated.
Yes, rather than...
Alert.
Doesn't suggest disorientated, does it?
It doesn't either suggest or not suggest that he's disorientated. It makes no comment.
And by the time the identification procedure takes place, he's described as mentally very bright and not under the influence of the morphine given earlier that day at 5:1.
Well, he's incorrect about the under the influence of the morphine. He's also discounting the effects of the general anaesthetic. The agent was ether, and one of the downsides of ether was that it affected mental functioning for a prolonged period of time.
Are you able to comment on what you feel PC Jagger's state of mind is likely to have been at the time of that identification parade?
Most people have had flu.
Yeah.
And when we get a really bad dose of flu, our mind often plays tricks with us. And that's exactly what can happen with septicemia. It can happen with drugs such as morphine and the anaesthetic drugs.
In your view, is P.C. Jagger's identification of Alfred Moore as his killer reliable?
No.
And if you were on a jury, would you be prepared to rely on his identification of the man in the dock?
No.
I'll give it some more thought, but I have to say I don't immediately feel that there is any cause to open up this conviction.
This is really a case about an identification. That identification has been deemed unreliable by an eminent expert. So my view is that there are grounds for reopening the case of Alfred Moore, and I'll be working towards compiling the necessary arguments over the forthcoming days.
The legal arguments have been prepared, and it now falls to His Honour Judge David Radford to deliberate. Based on his expert opinion, he will recommend if the case should be reviewed or not.
Now I feel that this is the end of quite a long road, and it is the moment of truth.
Judge Radford has over 40 years of experience at the criminal bar and sat at the Court of Appeal. For this programme, he'll be treating this matter as he would any other case.
I'm here today to consider, with the help of learned counsel, the safety of the conviction of Alfred Moore. Mr. Dean, on behalf of the defence, do you wish to make your submissions?
Yes. This was a case characterised by circumstantial evidence, depending wholly on the identification evidence of P.C. Jagger. There is now the evidence of Professor Hopkins, consultant anaesthetist. In his view, P.C. Jagger would have been incapable of making a reliable identification of his killer. Professor Hopkins found the circumstances of the identification parade, quote, extraordinary, and that, in his opinion, the evidence is fundamentally unreliable. Coming to the point, it is my submission that Mr. Jagger's identification of Alfred Moore was so flawed that it ought never to have surfaced in evidence. And without it, no sustainable case would have existed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. Ms. Wass, do you want to respond?
First of all, I agree entirely with Mr. Dean that this is a case that depended wholly on the identification of P.C. Jagger. I am not persuaded by Professor Hopkins' evidence.
Well, it's perhaps for me to be persuaded rather than you.
All right. One has to work on the basis that we are dealing with competent medical practitioners here, and there is not a scintilla of evidence to suggest that the patient, P.C. Jaggers, was either disorientated, confused, or in any way incapable of giving a coherent account. Professor Hopkins' evidence does, in reality, do nothing to undermine the evidence that was before this jury, and that remains the position.
Yes. Thank you both. I will now consider your helpful submissions, and I will look again at the evidence in the light of the arguments that you both have put before me.
Thank you very much.
Jeremy has cast serious doubt on the police investigation. The only new evidence he can present concerns P.C. Jagger. Will it be enough? The judge has reached his verdict.
There can be no doubt someone fatally shot two police officers not far from the farmhouse home of Mr. Alfred Moore. One of those officers survived long enough to be able positively to identify Mr. Moore as the man who had shot him and his colleague. The fact, in my view, remains the available medical evidence from fully and properly qualified medical practitioners would have made clear that Police Constable Jagger was well capable of undertaking a proper identification. In my view, I see no proper basis for suggesting that the jury's verdict should be exceptionally considered now to be referred again as to its safety. I'll rise.
Today,
Even after reviewing the facts of the case, Sasha remains confident that the right decision was made.
Jeremy, I wasn't altogether surprised by that judgment because the case against Alfred Moore was a strong one circumstantially, and overlaid on the circumstantial evidence was the direct evidence of identification by PC Jagger.
I'm afraid I stand by the opinion I adopted when I made my submissions to Judge Radford, that I do not accept that an identification of a person in the condition he was in the circumstances in which it was made, seriously ill and in hospital, is satisfactory. And if you factor out the identification, there wasn't enough evidence to convict Alfred Moore, and therefore he shouldn't have been hanged. That's my view.
Bronwyn has travelled to meet the barristers. This is the first time they have met each other since the judgment.
Since I last met them, lots of things have happened, and I'd like to discuss those points with them, and also I'd like to discuss the judgment. As I didn't agree with it, at the time, I'd like their opinions on it.
Nice to see you again.
Hi, Bronwyn,
Come and
nice
sit
to see
down.
you. Well, Bronwyn, it's been some time since Judge Radford announced his decision. How are you feeling about the judgment now?
Well, to be honest, I do not agree. I definitely don't agree. It was a dreadful miscarriage of justice, and I really won't rest until I've done my very best to clear his name.
So tell us what you've been doing since we last met.
Well, actually, the programme has motivated me into doing a lot more research. We have come up with some quite interesting findings, and I'm hoping that once we put the case together, Alfred will be cleared.
The cornerstone of the original conviction was the bedside identification of Alfred Moore by PC Jagger, something Bronwyn is hoping Professor Hopkins can help her undermine.
Ever since I saw him on the programme with Jeremy and Sasha, I've thought his evidence could be crucial in clearing my father's name.
Professor Hopkins has agreed to write a modern medical assessment of PC Jagger's condition prior to death to support Bronwyn's case.
I'm really pleased that we have your expertise on this. Could you explain more to me the points that you think are important?
So PC Jagger had a wound that affected a major blood vessel in his abdomen that wasn't detected at the surgery, so he was constantly bleeding from the moment he was shot until he died. Secondly, there's the consequences of the blood loss. That means there's not enough blood circulating in the body, whereby his brain was being starved of oxygen, so he couldn't think clearly. I think what we can be certain about is the consequences of all the injuries that PC Jagger has sustained were very likely to have compromised his ability to give reliable evidence.
Jagger's surgeon, Mr. Wrigley, made a statement 8 days after Jagger's death, in the presence of 2 senior detectives.
And I have it here, and there seems to be quite a few references to PC Jagger being alert.
I've counted them. There are 12 in all.
12?
12.
That's pretty impressive. And yet there's really quite important information that isn't here. There should have been a better evaluation of PC Jagger's mental function. It's a formal medical assessment of his mental capacity. And clearly, what we have with Mr. Wrigley's statement is just not that.
No. I think this report was made, obviously, in front of a police officer, and just the way that it is made and the fact that it refers to his alertness 12 times, but to his temperature twice, I feel he's been prompted as he's been making the statement.
When the murder took place, the jury at the time was shown no medical evidence on Jagger's mental ability to identify the killer.
The lack of medical evidence shown to the jurors at the time means that we can put your report forward as new evidence.
And I'm really hopeful that the same conclusion isn't drawn as was drawn by Judge Radford.
To achieve clearing my father's name would mean more to me than winning the pools or the lottery, because it would be something real. It's inside me and I've wanted to do it for such a long time. When you wish for something and you're trying hard to achieve it, to actually achieve it is the pinnacle, of all your hopes.
Now Bronwyn has collected new evidence. She's hoping she's done enough to alter the course of justice.
Well, Bronwyn, you've clearly been investigating at different angles and looking at your father's case. You've got a great deal of passion about the situation.
Yes, I'm actually quite excited with what we've come across.
Can I just raise Professor Hopkins? Because I do remain concerned about his contribution. Mr. Wrigley was the surgeon who dealt with the officer, Mr. Jagger.
Yes.
And as far as he was concerned, completely competent to make an identification.
Well, there, you see, Sasha, I immediately disagree, because the information regarding his life support, his blood pressure and everything else is minimal.
But you're not suggesting, are you, that Mr. Wrigley wasn't a qualified surgeon? I mean, he operated on Jagger.
No, I think he's absolutely qualified, but I don't think that is what the police were interested in when they were there making his statement with him.
My concern, which I know Bronwyn will share, is that in the modern world, I'm afraid I fundamentally disagree with you that evidence of the quality of PC Jagger in a hospital, in the condition he's in, would never see the light of day, and I'm surprised in those circumstances that you feel comfortable with it.
But what we can do, Bronwyn, and what is permissible, is for us to look now at the fact that a qualified surgeon gave an opinion at the time. It was formally conducted, carefully conducted, with judicial oversight.
Sasha, in the end, we three are discussing this issue, but Professor Hopkins is a modern-day expert, and it's his immovable opinion that the identification evidence of PC Jagger should never have been placed before the jury. And with respect, you're not qualified, and nor am I, to go behind that opinion.
Of course, it's not just the evidence that Professor Hopkins has put forward. They are the police statements that we found that are conflicting.
Sergeant Butler, according to him, he's now where the two injured officers are. Yeah. Butler then says he met Jenkins and Hopping in the fields above, and he brings them down to the scene of the crime.
So Butler meets Jenkins and Hopping and brings them to the scene. Both couldn't have done it.
Not two of them, no.
No. The prosecution relied heavily on the police evidence. And I really think, Steve, that what you've done has undermined the prosecution's case against my father. I need some advice on whether you consider it's adequate.
My view is that the focus should be on what I regard to be a wholly unsatisfactory identification, and I encourage you to pursue an application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, very much so.
Well, there's one thing I'm confident of. If there's one person who can put this case forcefully and persuasively, it is you.
Thank you, Sasha.
Very nice to see you again.
I think my meeting with Jeremy and Sasha went very well. I thought their comments were positive, particularly Jeremy's, regarding the medical evidence. And I think we'll go down that route, investigate it further. I feel absolutely certain that it will help us clear my father's name. And I really, really will fight until the end. I am not going to give this case up.